Welcome back. And last week we talked about hormone replacement therapy for people who can't secrete aldosterone. So that was people who have Addison's disease. In this video we're going to cover the next syllabus dot point, which is actually a bit of a revision of an older one. So if you've watched one of the first videos of this chapter, you would remember doing something similar to this. So the actual dot point says students will analyze information from secondary sources to compare and explain differences in urine concentrations of terrestrial mammals, marine fish, and freshwater fish. So first, before we start, I wanted to go over, don't think I actually have done this before, but I want to go over what filtrate is and compare filtrate to urine. So if you look at this picture over here, that's the one I've shown a couple times already. Filtrate is just the liquid that we call it when it's inside the tube, when it's inside the nephron, like from the distal tube, the proximal tube down the loop of Henle. Right now it's always called filtrates. That's a liquid inside the nephron. So all this is that in green is that filtrate. But once it gets to the end, so once it's here, now we've removed all the stuff we want to remove and put it back into our body, the good stuff. And now all that's left is the stuff we want to get rid of, and then it's called urine. So this part, the yellow was urine, and the green was filtrate. So we bring all that stuff from our Bowman's capsule, from glomerulus into Bowman's capsule. Once it's in our Bowman's capsule, once it's in our nephron, we call it a filtrate. It travels down, stuff we want gets reabsorbed, and in the end, the stuff that's left over, stuff that we will urinate out, is called the urine. Before it's called the filtrate. So why did I discuss this? Because we have to look at what is in the filtrate compared to what is in the urine. So a couple of interesting points is we have, so I mentioned amino acids and glucose. In the filtrate itself, we have quite a bit of it, glucose, amino acids, but I mentioned we don't want to lose that. So if you look at how much there is in the filtrate compared to urine, so there's almost nothing, 0 gram of amino acids and glucose in the urine, whereas there might be 200 grams of glucose and 10 grams of amino acids in the filtrate. The reason why is we've reabsorbed all the amino acids and glucose, and by the time it's reached that urine part, there's nothing left. We've held on to amino acids and glucose. Now protein, there is 0 in our filtrate and 0 in our urine. The reason why is because they were too big. The molecules were too big. They didn't actually fit into the Bowman's capsule. So there's none to begin with. Salt, we had 1,500 grams, and then we have 15 grams at the end. And remember, sometimes we have too much salt, sometimes we have too little salt. So we will always get rid of some. But how much we get rid of depends on if we have too much salt or too little salt in our body. We have urea, that's the waste product. We've got 50 grams in our filtrate and 45 grams in our urine. So almost all that was in a filtrate was also in our urine, because obviously we don't want to keep hold of urea. So we've gotten rid of most of that urea, because that's a waste product. And water, interesting as well, we've got 200 liters, so a lot of water will go for that filtrate. Whereas we only get rid of, this is per day, we only get rid of 2 liters of those 200 liters. Maybe more if we're super hydrated, if we have lots of water, if we've drunk lots of water, we might get rid of more. And if we're dehydrated, we might get rid of less. But on average, we get rid of 2 liters of water a day. Right, so back to that actual syllabus dot point. Let's compare and explain the differences in urine concentrations of terrestrial mammals, marine fish, and freshwater fish. So first here, this is actually a picture I'm pretty proud of today, which is unusual because usually I don't like my drawings. But this is a terrestrial mammal, so I've drawn an elephant. And you can imagine this elephant is just somewhere in the desert or somewhere in a sunny area where there's not much water. So he'll walk around, and obviously one of his main missions in life is to find water, because water is essential. 80% of the body is made out of water, or less for the elephant, but only a bit less. So water is really important for him. But one of the problems is obviously there's a lot of water, not much water in the desert, and he still produced something called ammonia. If you remember, ammonia was a waste product. And the problem is this is really poisonous. This was poisonous. That's why I drew it in green, because it's really poisonous. And it's so poisonous we have to get rid of it very fast. If we can't get rid of it very fast, then we can't. We'll die, because it'll increase our pH. And if it increases our pH, it means our enzymes become denatured. So ammonia is very poisonous. So if this elephant wanted to get rid of ammonia, what it would have to do is it would basically have to constantly urinate. It would have to constantly urinate. Now, obviously, that would be quite uncomfortable if we were constantly urinating. But more importantly, if we were constantly urinating, it would be constantly losing water. And a terrestrial mammal, in most cases, because they live on land, they don't have that much water. They can't do that. They can't constantly urinate. So they're not going to produce ammonia. So if you remember from a while back, they don't produce ammonia. They convert ammonia into urea. So urea we can keep in our body for a bit longer. So we can wait for a while for us to urinate that out. Whereas if it were ammonia, he would have to urinate constantly. So that doesn't happen. So we go from ammonia into urea. And this is what we have in our body. This is what's in our urine. But that's just the waste products of nitrogenous waste. So that's one thing. We have urea as a waste product, and fish don't. I'll go over why fish don't, but we have urea. And another difference was that we have two scenarios. If that elephant happens to find lots of water, like way too much water than usual, he'll be very hydrated. He'll have lots of water in his system. And to make sure that balance is there again, he's going to produce dilute urine. So dilute, again, written in white because that means your urine itself will be white. So he's drunk in too much water and he's going to get rid of that water again by urinating a lot and making sure that all that water is gone again. But for most cases, for that terrestrial mammal, it won't be that white because it hasn't found too much water. And actually he's found too little water, which means he's going to have concentrated urine, right? So yellow because his urine or the elephant's urine might be yellow. And that means there's not much water in the actual urine because he wanted to make sure he can actually keep hold of the urine. So the urine itself is yellow. So there's two scenarios for terrestrial mammals. Either it's going to be producing dilute urine if it's drunken too much, or it's going to be producing concentrated urine if it's drunken too little. So to conserve water, it's concentrated urine. To get rid of water, it's dilute urine. And in its urine, it's always going to be urea because that's one of the waste products of protein breakdown. Now for saltwater fish, you can imagine this nice fish here. Again, very good drawing. Nice fish swimming in salt water. These brown dots, that's our salt. So again, salt was a solute. And because it's salt water, there's a lot more solute in the actual water compared to the fish. So one of the problems is that water will naturally go out. So water will go from low solute, so from the fish, out into the sea, out into the ocean. So you can imagine that usually what would happen, it would actually shrivel up, and it would be like this. If it had no adaptation to cope with that water, it would become dehydrated and shrivel up. But how often have you seen in the ocean a fish become shriveled up like this? Not too often. And one of the reasons why is because it has ways to deal with this. First of all, I'm going to draw a mouth. And the reason why is because it's constant drinking. So this fish is constantly drinking. And the reason why it's constantly drinking is to make sure it doesn't dehydrate. So it's constantly drinking. And also, it's going to produce concentrated urine, but not much of it, and concentrated, right? So it's going to produce concentrated urine. So those two adaptations help this saltwater fish not become shriveled up and dehydrated. Another one is, remember ammonia was from the breakdown of protein, so that happens in both mammals and in fish, but because the actual fish are surrounded by water, it can actually get rid of ammonia constantly. There's no problem for that because they have something called gills. So the gills would be somewhere around here. And what happens is ammonia gets produced, and so immediately as soon as it gets produced, it's removed for the gills. So ammonia is removed for the gills, and that's possible because it has constant contact with water, whereas terrestrial mammals don't, so they can't really do this. So they have to produce urea. Mammals have to produce urea, whereas fish can produce ammonia, and then you should get rid of it as soon as it gets produced. You can't keep it in the body for long because it's obviously deadly and poisonous. On the flip side, if you have a freshwater fish, which this is a freshwater fish, its solute is going to be more in the inside than in the outside, which means usually water would travel from low solute to high solute, so from here into the fish. And what would that mean for the fish? If nothing were changed, it would mean it would overhydrate, it would bubble up, Obviously that's not good, that's bad for the fish. Same as dehydration, that would also be bad. But both of these scenarios don't usually happen. And the reason why it doesn't become overhydrated is because compared to saltwater fish, it doesn't drink, so there's no drinking. Obviously, why would it want to drink if it's already if it already has too much water? It does not drink. That's number one. And the other difference was it will produce basically a continuous stream of urine. So it actually constantly urinates. And that's to get rid of all that extra water. So, yeah, constantly urinates. So the freshwater fish constantly urinates and does not drink to cope with that hypotonic solution. That was a hypotonic solution. Because that means hypo means there's less solute in the solution than in the fish. And the saltwater fish is going to be in a hypertonic, more solid inside than outside. And to cope with that hypertonic solution, it will constantly drink to make sure it gets more and more water, otherwise it gets dehydrated. And it will produce concentrated urine, so make sure it doesn't lose too much water. But in both of the fishes, they lose their protein digestion, so protein breakdown for ammonia, whereas terrestrial mammals is urea. So just to recap quickly, we have the differences. So compare, terrestrial mammals either produce dilute urine or concentrated urine. In most cases concentrated urine, but sometimes dilute urine, depending on how much water they find. If they find too much, they produce too dilute. If they don't find enough, they produce concentrated. But mostly they try to conserve water, so they're not going to be producing too much urine. They don't produce ammonia because that's poisonous and they can't really constantly urinate. The reason why they can't constantly urinate is because they can't drink constantly. There would be too much water loss. So they produce urea, which they can store for a while and then get rid of later. And both the saltwater fish is drinking a lot, constant drinks, and produces concentrated urine. Whereas the freshwater fish constantly urinates, but doesn't drink. So it's the opposite. And they both produce ammonia, which they remove with their gills. So I hope that makes sense. All you need to be able to do is compare the concentrations of urine in terms of water and salt, and urea or ammonia for fish and for the mammals.